So after winning the Specialist Under 23 last week, it would be rude to not keep this segment going. And what we're going to do this week is preview some players for the Specialist tournament. Again, we're going to be focusing on those players that have a last 15 score under 40, because I feel it's a little bit more difficult to find those players and adds a lot more value. I won't be previewing players that are under 50 because it's frankly most of the players on the game, and I think it just makes it a little bit too easy. But what I do think is really worthwhile here is just calling out the changes that have been made with regards to the eligibility this week. I'm not sure if this is widely understood, but what Sorare have essentially done is merged the concept of the special Threekly, which was 3 scored players, and then you could put in sort of 2 commons that would score 0, with Underdog. What this means is that Underdog this week, only 4 of your players will score, but you have to enter a 5th player just because of the way that the UX works at the moment. But essentially what you're doing is picking 4 players that will score and have an average of below 50 in their last 15 games. Just wanted to call that out because it's a very different approach to what has been happening in previous weeks. In my opinion, makes it even easier to enter because you no longer need a goalkeeper. For me, it's absolutely Goalkeeper is the one that you're going to be using a common card on. You don't want that to score, and realistically, the goalkeepers don't have very high peaks anyway. So for me, it's all about focusing on 4 outfield players, but historically the goalkeeper has always been a huge blocker and a huge barrier to entry, particularly within Rare. So I just wanted to start the recording off with just highlighting that rule change this week, because you may have previously overlooked this tournament because of the requirement for eligibility and the goalkeeper, but now it makes it frankly a lot easier to enter. So just a quick one, this is the team that I'm going to be rolling this week. So Coffee is in there just as a facilitator. One thing that is worth noting is that even though it scores 0, your common has to be last 15 under 40 as well. So I've just thrown Coffee in there because he's going to score 0, and then gone with Cresta, Santi Simon, Glebov of Rostov, and Beltran as well. So hopefully that one will serve me well. And now we shall go into the preview. So what we're going to be doing now is looking at the specialist players. As of last week, I've got 10 players, 1 goalkeeper, 3 defenders, 3 midfielders, and 3 forwards. Big point here is that these are the players that are last 15 under 40 for specialist, and specialist rule requirements have not changed. So you still need to play 5 players for specialists, with 2 of those players, any 2 of the 5, having a last 15 score of under 40. So without any further ado, let's get stuck in. First one is Marwin Hitz. Hitz was playing last year for Dortmund. When I say playing, he was reserve, but he did have the occasional game towards the end of the season, which helps give him eligibility. You'll see here there were a few, as a 29, a 27 and a 40 that he scored just when he came in for injury cover right at the end of last season for Borussia Dortmund. He is now at FC Basel, who are in Challenger. They are a much stronger team relative to their division, and you'd imagine over the course of the season that Hitz could be fairly useful and grab a couple of clean sheets. He could keep his eligibility for a few more weeks. As you see now, the last 15 is 32. He scored 44 points last week. Depending on his score again this week, we're going to be taking then the average of 5 scores. So the likelihood is that you can use him this weekend, you can use him next weekend as well, depending on the score that he places in the midweek Europa Conference League qualifier, and then also in the Swiss Super League this weekend. But for me, just looking at it, looking at his cost, looking at the strength of the team, looking at the fact that I always try to find a goalkeeper that is eligible because of the lack of upside, Hitch just stood out to me as as a great opportunity and a great option this week. Not really a lot more to say about that. You're literally putting Goalkeeper in and hoping for a clean sheet. So we will sort of briefly highlight him as a player. The reason I wanted to highlight him is because what I do tend to notice is that players that are no longer auctioned, obviously FC Basel are not a licensed club, so they're not coming through the auctions at the moment. They tend to be massively overlooked. If you look at Hitz's price, he could be a legitimate option for a Challenger Europe side this year in limited, and he's still hovering around the 0.1. If you look at prices of other established Challenger Europe goalkeepers at top teams within their league, they're a lot higher than 0.1. So Hitz is definitely, I've bought one. Hitz is a player that I plan to use in the Specialist and Underdog for as long as I possibly can, and then after that I will roll into a Challenger or global team, because I think he's a really strong option at the price. Talking of strong options at the price, next up, defender is Konstantinos Laifis. Standard were an absolute car crash last season, but they now have Ronnie Delia, who's come in from New York as their coach, and I'm pretty confident that Standard will improve this season quite significantly. I remember the first year on the platform, they were quite good. They had some really good players such as Suleiman Mala. Laifis as well was a player that was capable of some incredible peak scores. If we have a look here, you'll see he was injured, he was out of form for a very long period last season. Mostly the whole team were out of form, but you see here there's a 98, that albeit was with a decisive. There's a couple of 60s here without a decisive. He's capable of 30 plus point AA games, and if you roll back to the season before, where Standard were not absolute cannon fodder for the league, he was brilliant. Look at some of these scores here. You'd like to think that Delia improves them, and Laifis is a player that has real peak scoring potential. So they're playing Ghent this weekend, which is obviously not an easy fixture. Ghent are one of the top teams in the league, but Laifis is one of those sort of pure defenders who you want him to be busy. The fact he is playing a more difficult opponent gives him the opportunity to really churn AA. So, the price here, he's €9. He's 0.006 at the moment. Like, when that for a limited facilitator, that is that's really not a lot of money to get a player with the scoring capability that he has. Next up, we're moving into Russia. There is an element of the fact they're not auctioned; they are overlooked. Tim Jedvaj is again pretty affordable for the price. If we look this weekend, Lokomotiv Moscow are playing Rostov at home. That's a pretty decent fixture, although Rostov are certainly looking slightly better than they were last year. This is again another opportunity for a defender to put up a respectable AA score. And when you think about this, as a player that is your facilitator, if they can go 50 plus points, then really put yourself in with a good chance. And that is what Jedvaj was able to do last week. He put up a 54 with a yellow card. So realistically, a 60-point score at home is not out of the question. So he's another one of those that fits into that bucket of cheap facilitators that I think is a really worthy consideration for your team this weekend. Next up, we go back to the MLS. We have seen, honestly, a real sell-off of America and Asia cards in the last couple of weeks, with people really getting hyped about the return of the European leagues. Frankly, I think it's absolute madness. With the World Cup this year, there is fixture congestion that means that the overlap between Asia, America and European leagues are much greater than it was last season. Why is that a good thing? Well, ultimately, more teams active, more options, more competition mean more prizes. So the fact that you can use cheaper America cards, cheaper Asia cards to compete in global, to compete in under 23 when the prizes are at their best. I personally think there's some really good value to be had in America at the moment. Obviously, Herrera is one of the players that I believe is a good option for this weekend, mostly because Real Salt Lake are playing at home. They tend to play much better at home than they do away. His scores have started to rebound in the last couple of weeks. He's put up a 45 away at Atlanta. Last home game here, Real Salt Lake Sporting Kansas City put up a 54. Realistically, for a cheap player to come in and fill your side, getting anything over 50 is a real bonus. And he's one of those players that plays every game, and on occasions has been known to go over 60. So with a bit of luck, you might get a respectable score out of Herrera. And again, his price-wise is very much in the same price range as the two players mentioned before. Next up is one of my favourite players on the game, and that is Rafa Holzhauser. He was someone that was absolutely instrumental to me winning one shot back when I first joined Sorare, and he's honestly really fallen off people's radar. Reason being that beer shot last season were an absolute catastrophe. I think it was obvious that they were going to be relegated from about halfway through the season. Holzhauser was played out of position. They had multiple changes of managers. It just was a complete and utter mess, and that ultimately impacted his scores. And as you see, there were a bunch of sub-appearances towards the end of the season that has really tracked down his last 15 score. Much like Konstantinos Leifis that we mentioned earlier, if we roll back to all, just look at these scores. Look at what he has the capability of offering when he is in a team that plays to his strengths. And thankfully for us, he has been signed to Leuven and is going to be the sort of main creator there. He's going to absolutely dominate set pieces, and I honestly am pretty confident that he will drastically increase his scoring output this season. So he's one of those players that you can grab him, you can play him this weekend in the specialist, and then when you look at his fixtures he's got coming up, Westerlo next weekend, a newly promoted side. You've got Standard Liège, you've got Ostend, you've got some wonderful fixtures coming up in the next sort of 5-6 games where he could be useful in a global team, he could be useful in a challenger team. So I definitely think that Holzhauser is someone worthy of consideration, and he's going to be in my team. I'll show you my team at the end, but I'm very excited about what I'm putting out this week, and Holzhauser is going to be one of those key parts of it. Going back to the MLS, although still with a bit of a Belgian theme, is Chris Durkin, who spent part of his career in Belgium playing at Sint-Truiden. He has now gone back to DC, and in all honesty, it's taken him a bit of a while to settle. So if we look at his scores, it's a combination of his time in DC and his matches right at the end of last season where he was at Sint-Truiden. But in all honesty, his DC scores have been pretty poor at the start. If you look at it, it's really taken him a while to settle. Possibly wasn't up to match sharpness, just getting used to new surroundings, the fact that DC have been almost as bad as Beerschot this season. But what's really sort of standing out to me is in its last 5, there's a 67, there's a 56, there's a 48. Those are looking quite respectable scores, and this weekend they've got Montreal at home, and in all honesty, Montreal, they're not known for keeping clean sheets. So the chance that Durkin with his improved AA game could grab a decisive is definitely there. And when you look at prices, he's a fraction of the price of Holzhauser. So if you are looking to compete on a budget, then Durkin is a really interesting option, and also under 23 eligible as well. So one that you could grab and could offer utility for you moving on into the future as well. Next up, we go back to Belgium, and we're looking at a player from Sporting Charleroi, which is Ali Golazadeh. He's had a bit of interest rising in him recently. Why am I picking him this week? Is because of who they play. Charleroi have a home game against Eupen, and frankly, Eupen are in real danger of relegation this season. If you look at what's happened over the summer, they've lost Emmanuel Agadbu, they've lost Jonathan Harris, they've lost Jordi Amat, they've lost Julian Ngoy, they've lost a bunch of starters, like quality players that were pretty key to their starting 11 at points last season, and they've not really replaced them. I feel bad, you've got Steph Peters and Stevan Prevliak who are still at the club. They're going to be wondering, how quick until I can get out, because Eupen is just, as a club, is being absolutely gutted. And also, they've got one of my least favourite managers on the game, Bernd Stork, who completely trashed the talent that Genk had last season by just arbitrarily rotating centre-backs every other game. So I am really, really not confident on Eupen's chances of staying up this season. If you look at who has come up, it's Westerlo. They are very well backed financially. They're making some big moves in the market. Definitely on paper now have a stronger squad than Eupen. I think Eupen and Sirang are going to be two of the clubs that are going to really struggle. And the fact that Charleroi have a home fixture against Eupen this weekend is enough to sort of really throw Ali G into consideration. Price wise, again, he's slightly more expensive than Durkin, not quite as expensive as Holzhauser. So depending on your budget, there's a real option here. And again, he is a very useful player when he's fit. So he's one that could be used in a challenger side afterwards. It's not just simply you're buying him for specialist and that's it. You're sort of catching these players that for one reason or another have had a period of bad scores, and you're sort of catching them as they're on their way back up. So he's definitely another interesting option. The next interesting option is actually from the same match, which is Anas Zarouri, another under 23 who looks very, very affordable at the moment, both in limited and in rare. It was his first season stepping up to 1A last year. He had some moments where he played really well. He had a few games towards the start of the season where he was grabbing decisives. As the season went on, he was rotating more frequently. He, I think, struggled to keep pace throughout the entire season, but he's been looking pretty sharp in pre-season, and I expect his minutes to be increased this year. He's only a young lad, he's still 21, but I think he's an interesting player and he's capable of scoring well on the matrix on his day. So I honestly think that Charleroi Eupen could be 3 or 4 goals. They could put 3 or 4 goals past them, and if Zarouri starts, then he's got to be a candidate for sort of being involved in that action. Next up, continuing the Eupen theme, is Julian Ngoy, who has left Eupen and joined Mechelen, which is already an upgrade. Even the fact that there is quite a period of transition for Mechelen this summer with Otto Franeker joining Genk, they've still kept a bunch of their strong players. And if you look at their forward line, Julian Ngoy should slot into it with Hugo Kuipers has left to join Ghent. And you've got Marian Schwed as well, who's been playing really well in pre-season. But Ngoy's a very, very exciting player, and I think he's overlooked because of the scores. He didn't play, he was injured towards the end of last season at Eupen, he wasn't playing, his last 15 is very low, but I think he's very, very capable of scoring well, and is pretty cheap at the moment, considering the other options that you could look towards for specialists. Even in as Eupen fell off last season, he still got involved and grabbed a couple of decisives, so he's definitely capable of scoring at this level, and you'd hope that in a slightly stronger team then he would increase the number of decisives that he outputs this weekend. Antwerp is not the easiest of fixtures, but Ngoy's a player who really does excel on the counter-attack, and Antwerp are another side going through a period of transition this summer with a new manager coming in, lots of new players coming in. So it's definitely, I wouldn't rule out him grabbing a decisive this weekend. Last but not least, we are going back to our MLS for our final preview, mostly because of the complete drop off in pricing for players that are stateside. Freddie Montero is at the moment only €4, 0.0025 ETH, which is, you know, absolutely nothing if you're looking to get a budget team in. Why Montero? Well, Raul Ruidiaz is still injured, although he's back in training. Colorado, the game this weekend, is likely to come far too early for him. Colorado have been pretty awful this season. They do not travel well. The Sounders are really strong at home, so I think, you know, Montero, and the choice of Montero or Bruin with a week's rest, Montero is going to be in there. Bruin did not perform too well last week, so I think that Montero will get the nod, and I think it's a pretty favourable fixture for him. I could see Sounders scoring a couple of goals in this one, and at the price, there is really quite low risk to buying someone like Freddie this weekend and then reselling him afterwards, because if you look at the price wise, he's, you know, very much at the bottom of his pricing curve. So that's it. I hope that, you know, in covering the rule change on Underdog and players that could be considered for specialists, I've added a bit of value and shared some insight this week that can help you with planning your teams. So last but not least, who am I picking? Well, the two facilitators that I've gone for this week are Marwin Hitz and Rafa Holzhauser. In terms of the over 40 players, I've gone for Wesley Hope and Jimmy Chara, who just sneak in under that 60 point cap, and then Carlos Vela is my over 60 point player. Hope is capable of incredible AA, plays Ostend at home, and then we've got Vela and Chara as well, who are capable of good AA and scoring. So thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed. See you next week.